from Indiana is recognized for any questions she might have for our panel.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for coming to testify before us today. We appreciate your time. I'm so glad we're considering H.R. 277, the regulations from the Executive in Need of Scrutiny Act of 2023, or the REINS Act. I'm a proud co-sponsor, an original co-sponsor of this bill. If the Biden administration has taught us anything, it's that this administration and the bureaucrats within it are in desperate need of scrutiny, to say the least. And it's our job, with the help of this bill, to rein in regulations and to hold this administration accountable. Congresswoman Hageman, it's always good to see a fellow female freshman legislator up here, and welcome to your first Rules Committee.
Thank you.
I want to just summarize the three biggest aspects of the REINS Act, and as I see them for constituents back home, and I hope you won't mind, I'm just going to ask you a couple of questions about that would cover conceptually what the REINS Act is doing. Is it accurate that the REINS Act would require Congress's support before any, quote, major rule goes into effect?
Yes.
Is it accurate that the REINS Act would help to restore Congress's Article I responsibilities by putting Congress back in the driver's seat on major decisions affecting the American people?
Yes.
Is it accurate that the REINS Act protects the will of the American voter by ensuring that Congress is the body making major decisions, not unelected bureaucrats in Washington?
Yes.
Thank you. I couldn't think of more common sense legislation that we should be considering. The people's representatives are entrusted with making the hard decisions, and the REINS Act rightly puts the burden back on us to deliver those results. And in this bill, House Republicans are delivering for our constituents by holding the Biden administration accountable. Ms. Hageman, one of the things I hear most from constituents back home in Indiana is pleading to literally rein in the size and scope of the federal government and the out-of-control regulatory state. Am I right in assuming your constituents in the great state of Wyoming feel the same as mine do?
Absolutely.
Thank you. Before I close, I just wanted to, we've gone over sort of conceptually what the REINS Act is doing, but I want to talk about what it actually says. So it establishes an approval process for a major rule. A major rule may only take effect if Congress approves. A major rule is defined as a rule that has resulted in or is likely to result in, 1, an annual effect on the economy of $100 million or more, 2, a major increase in costs or prices for consumers or individuals, government agencies, or geographic regions, and 3, significant adverse effects on competition, investment, productivity, innovation, or the ability of U.S.-based enterprises to compete with foreign entities. So I want to take a look at some of the Biden rules and proposed rules that may or may not fall under the REINS Act because those that I looked at did not have a score on how much they would cost. The Thrifty Food Plan. Even though it was implemented following the COVID-19 pandemic, the Thrifty Food Plan increases SNAP benefits by $36.24 per person per month, an increase of more than 25% from pre-pandemic levels, and the largest permanent increase in benefits in the program's history. The proposed rule minimizing the risks of climate change in federal acquisitions requires federal agencies to give preference to bidders whose proposals have a lower carbon impact. That has no regard to the cost of doing business, what might save taxpayer dollars. It requires preference to the lower carbon footprint. A rescission of a Trump-era rule which enabled the expedited removal of certain new classes of undocumented immigrants. Overturning the Trump Health and Human Services Sunset Clause. The result means that HHS is now no longer forced to reduce its regulatory capacity. A proposed restricting the definition of independent contractors, making it more difficult for companies to hire workers as independent contractors and instead requiring them to be designated as employees. Requiring federal contractors to disclose, and I love this one, especially with our friends on the other side of the aisle disliking the REINS Act in particular. Requiring federal contractors to disclose their greenhouse gases and climate-related financial risk for contractors that receive greater than $50 million in funding from the federal government. So we can't ask the agencies to allow us to approve when they're spending more than $100 million on a rule, but we can require federal contractors to disclose greenhouse gas emissions if they're receiving more than $50 million in funding. I could go on. Efficiency standards for washing machines and refrigerators, proposed revisions to the Clean Power Plan referred to as new source performance standards, which will undoubtedly have a significant impact on utility costs and grid reliability. So we heard from our colleagues on the other side of the aisle that regulations should be left to the, quote, experts. But let's be certain as to what our Democrat friends are saying. They want unelected bureaucrats to have unimpeded authority to not only make rules that act as laws, but also spend significant amounts of taxpayer money. We heard our friends on the other side of the aisle say the REINS Act would apply to around 100 regulations a year. And you said this, Ms. Hageman, about the cost of that. Let's put that in perspective. If 100 proposed regulations will cost $100 million or more, that's a regulatory cost of trillions of dollars. They would support the government and our economy taking $1 trillion plus impact without any input from the people through their elected representatives. Finally, I'd like us to consider, encourage us to consider including the cost of rule rescissions. We had many Trump-era rules that were rescinded, and the cost of those are substantial, or executive orders in the REINS Act. When we passed the Fiscal Responsibility Act last week, we promised to come back every day fighting for fiscal sanity and out-of-control spending, so I'm pleased to be here considering today and supporting the REINS Act toward the goal of restoring the fiscal sanity in Washington. It's clear the regulatory regime of unelected bureaucrats has gotten completely out of control from what our founders intended, and I hope colleagues on both sides of the aisle will join me in supporting this important legislation. Thank you to the witnesses. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
I thank the gentlelady, and I thank both of you for appearing before us today.